I'm not sure what bugged me more, that I was a lousy husband or a lousy dad. I'm not even sure if I was depressed or just furious. It was a bit confusing. I spent my whole life trying to make my family's life better, and all I ended up doing was giving them stuff and money. It just doesn't work. It quickly became very clear that my only function was to fill the well. I love my wife and my kids. Please note that all of this it's in the past tense. I have my own business. Terry Martin and I grew up together. We were best friends since elementary school. Terry and I started the company right after finishing vocational school, and it grew faster than we could have imagined. So technically, I should say that we have our own business. A few years later, we both married our high school sweethearts. Life was good for the first 15 years or so. Everything was wonderful. The company was doing well. Terry and I both earned decent salaries, and we had more than 30 full-time employees. Time employs Terry and his wife, Myra and Terry had 3 sons, and Allison and I had twins, a boy and a girl. We all lived in McMansion, and we enjoyed eating out, taking vacations, and driving expensive cars. Terry and I were very business-oriented, and we put business first. We understood that our clients had to be satisfied, even if our employees weren't. A third of our best workers were former convicts. We hired them directly from the prison vocational school. In 8 years, only 2 of the ex-cons turned out to be a problem, and the other ex-cons quickly took care of it. They were doing well and weren't about to let a few troublemakers ruin their lives. We supported several community programs and even sponsored a softball team. Unfortunately, my family life was also unfair. Somehow, my wife became socially active for several progressive causes. I wasn't thrilled about it, but she let me do my thing, so I let her do hers. Politics had never been part of our world. Our family, but suddenly we began talking about current events and political issues. I tried hard to avoid such discussions, but it was futile. The more I disconnected from her or ignored her, the more determined she became. It was like watching CNN and Fox News simultaneously. I started trying to avoid her, but it was difficult. As my wife and I grew distant, so did my relationship with my children. For many years, we started talking about current events and political issues, and I tried to avoid it, but it was futile. The more I disconnected from her or ignored her, the more determined she became. It was like watching CNN and Fox News at the same time. I started trying to avoid her, but it was difficult. As my wife and I grew distant, so did my relationship with my children. For many years, I tried to engage my son, Jacob, in various activities. I didn't care if it was sports, hiking, or hunting and fishing. All he wanted to do was play video games, and as I later found out, occasionally enjoy marijuana. All my efforts were rejected, and eventually, my wife told me to just leave him alone and mind my own business. I would have resisted more, but my son would smirk at me whenever she said that. My daughter, Jordan, was. She was a carbon copy of her mom. She used to be Daddy's little angel, but now she hardly recognized me as her father. I couldn't even count how many piercings she had. Despite being on birth control, she still contracted gonorrhea twice. She loved going with her mom to all sorts of political gatherings and social events, but she wouldn't even consider going for ice cream or pizza with her dad. I also gave up trying to. She was like her mother's spitting image. But now I barely even recognized her. She had so many piercings, I couldn't even count them. Even with birth control, she got pregnant twice. She loved going with her mom to all kinds of political events, but she wouldn't even consider going for ice cream or pizza with her. Dottie also gave up trying to connect with her. One of the most serious downturns occurred when I refused to donate company money to one of her initiatives. They wanted to provide addicts with clean needles to prevent infections from shared or dirty ones. Allison didn't speak to me for a week. It was hard to imagine things could get any worse. The company's Christmas party was approaching, and Terry and I insisted that Allison and not take care of things. Got pretty bad when I refused to donate company money to one of her initiatives. They wanted to provide addicts with clean needles to prevent infections from shared or dirty ones. Allison didn't speak to me for a week. It was hard to imagine things could get any worse. The company's Christmas party was coming up, and Terry and I insisted that Allison and Na take care of it. Na was more than happy to do so, but she had to drag Allison, kicking and screaming, to help her. In the past few months, Allison had been going out more and more often. She also went on overnight trips to participate in various progressive activities. I didn't know if they were protests, rallies, or seminars. It didn't matter. Jacob had moved from weed to pills. I didn't know what kind, but that didn't matter either. Man was totally cool with doing it, but he had to drag Allison, kicking and screaming, to help her. Over the past few months, Allison had been going out more and more often. She also went on overnight trips to participate in various progressive activities. I had no idea if they were protests, rallies, or seminars. It didn't matter. Jacob had moved from weed to pills, but I had no idea what kind, and it didn't matter either. Jordan now had her own website with vlogs. Man did a great job with the Christmas party. She tried to share the credit with Allison, but Terry and I knew better. We had beer and wine, but no hard liquor. We had 100% employee participation. I think the annual bonuses had something to do with that. Allison and the kids were there, of course, but they didn't seem to enjoy it as much as everyone else. There were no social events. There weren't any social gatherings, but there was plenty of food. John, I need to talk to you for a minute. Terry tried not to draw attention as we stepped aside. What's the matter? I tried to speak casually to him. Jorge Martinez needs to talk to you, but he's a bit worried. What do you mean? Well, he doesn't want to ruin the party and doesn't want to upset you, but he really feels there's something you need to know. Jorge was one of our ex, he'd been with us for 6 years, and we didn't want to lose him. All right, bring him here. It's not going to be a problem, is it? Terry whined slightly. Jorge and his wife Elena looked a bit anxious. I smiled, and tried to appear relaxed to put them at ease. Terry quietly left. Mr. Terrell, we don't want. Terry and his wife Elena looked a bit anxious. I smiled and tried to act relaxed to put them at ease. Terry quietly left. We don't want to cause any trouble, but when my wife saw your wife today, she felt she had to say something. I tried to talk her out of it, but she insisted. I looked at his wife and nodded, indicating she could continue. She glanced at Jorge, nudged him with her elbow, and gestured for him to speak. Elena works at the Hampton. She's been cleaning the 5th floor for 2 years, and your wife and a certain Mr. Franklin have been using room 511 once or twice a week for the past year. They usually stay for only 2 to 3 hours, and always in the same room. I was speechless. I had a million questions. But I figured this wasn't the best time or place to ask. Elena looked relieved, but Jorge was pretty anxious, not knowing how I'd react. So, I just took his hand, looked him in the eye, and said, "Thank you." I smiled at Elena and gestured for them both. I said, "Thank you," and smiled at Elena and gestured for them to return to the party. Jorge relaxed as I was leaving. I walked past Harry and told Jorge I'd be giving him a raise next month. Kyle Franklin was in charge of the city's parking department. I didn't know him very well, but I knew he had been a public servant for almost 20 years. He dreamed of running for mayor someday. Jorge was relaxed when I left. I passed Harry on my way out and told him I'd be giving Jorge a raise next month. I didn't know Kyle Franklin that well, but he'd been working for the city for almost 20 years. He dreamed of running for mayor one day. He was married to Nora Franklin, who owned one of the county's leading real estate firms. She was an attractive woman who loved placing her ads on the sides of city buses. I wondered if she had a special rate for that. That evening, my wife gave me a hard time for leaving the party early. The kids weren't. Nora Franklin, the owner of one of the county's leading real estate firms, was an attractive woman who loved placing her ads on the sides of city buses. I wondered if she had a special rate for that. That evening, my wife gave me a dressing down for leaving the party early. The kids weren't too happy either. I just smiled and returned to my reading. Mickey Spain still read well after 70 years. On Monday morning, I comfortably awaited Nora Franklin's arrival at the Franklin real estate office. The secretary had prepared hot coffee, and I had brought along the big kill. She walked in around 10. I was pretty happy, actually. I just smiled and went back to reading. Mickey Spain still reads well after 70 years. On Monday morning, I relaxed while waiting for Nora Franklin to arrive at the Franklin real estate office. The secretary had made hot coffee, and I had brought the big cup. She walked in around 10 and stopped for a moment to look at me. "I wondered when you'd show up, Mr. Terrell." "It took you long enough." I followed her into her office and took my coffee with me. "I suppose when you own the company, you can set your own hours. Why hadn't I thought of that?" "John, may I call you John?" I nodded in approval. "John, I'm not going to rehash all this drama. I just want to know what you plan to do. I have a lot of questions, and I don't want you to get overwhelmed." This wasn't what I expected. I thought I was going to deliver a grand revelation. Boy, was I wrong, Miss Franklin. It seems I'm quite behind in this matter. I didn't even realize it myself. A friend just told me. I have no idea what to do next, and I have no one to confide in or discuss this with. To be honest, I thought you were in the dark just like me. John, I've known about this for more than 6 months. I probably should have contacted you sooner, but I had a lot on. I didn't want you to make a mistake by doing something rash. Oh, and by the way, call me Nora. What do you mean by something rash? Oh, you know, like playing Rambo with Kyle in public, maybe exposing them in some awkward manner. It's hard to predict what you macho men will do when something like my plate, and I didn't want you to make a mistake by doing something rash. Oh, by the way, call me Nora. What do you mean by something rash? Oh, you know, like playing Rambo with Kyle in public or exposing them in some awkward manner. It's hard to predict what you macho men will do when something like this happens. I think it will be much more effective if you approach this calmly. I never considered myself macho, anyway. Well, what are your plans? How can I help you? I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. I think we're going to need more time over the next 2 weeks. Nora Franklin and I became good. We've become friends over the past few months. Nora Franklin and I have been working together. She had been systematically setting her husband up. The IRS was very interested in his taxes. Nora had been keeping her personal and business taxes separate from his. The state prosecutor was investigating how he redirected state funds intended for road construction and transportation to other unspecified projects. The city was looking into his use of municipal funds to pay for motel rentals and restaurant bills. What made this really interesting was that she had managed to get all of them to cooperate in their investigations, so they all converged around the same time. None of these efforts helped my situation at all. But she made a good deal to sell her real estate business, and I might be able to do something similar. My biggest problem was my home and family. I no longer had close relationships with my wife or any of my children. I really didn't want to leave the business, but it was necessary. A month later, Nora had a solution. I announced that we were going to move to a new house. Allison's ears perked up, but all I heard from the kids was groaning. They liked our house. Jordan got interested when I mentioned the pool, and Jacob thought the car garage is pretty sweet. The trip to see the new house went well. It was twice the size of our current one and cost more than twice as much. Each of the kids had their own bathroom. Allison commented that we didn't have enough furniture to properly furnish the new place, but she seemed pleased when I told her she could buy all new things she liked. The professional kitchen was the icing on the cake. I told them we would all have new cars for the first time in many years. I was a great father and husband. Nora did a great job finding me a new home. It took her only 2 days. I told Allison that Franklin Real Estate was handling the deal for us, and she seemed a little surprised, but then she was cool with it. Nora already had a cash buyer for our old house. I thought it was interesting to see my wife and my wife's lover's wife sitting at the same table signing the documents. There were no fake pleasantries. We just sat down and got to work on the paperwork. The first stack to sign was for the sale of the old house. Allison and I both signed everything as present owner. Then, we had it notarized. We made $450. Allison was feeling pretty good, so she didn't pay much attention. She just signed the documents for the new house. When Nora said the price was $900, Allison smiled. 000, she smiled again when I said I was putting the new house in her name for tax purposes. She thought it was a great idea. However, what she didn't notice was that it wasn't a purchase contract, but an option to purchase. If she had read the fine print, she would have seen that the option was for 120 days. If the actual purchase wasn't made by then, the price would revert to $1 million, and the $40,000 option fee. I didn't want to lose money, but in the long run, it was worth it. After everything was signed and notarized, Nora handed her the keys to her new house and congratulated her. It seemed sincere, and I could barely keep myself from laughing. Allison was fuming the whole way home. She hadn't expected me to actually put the house in her name. She also didn't expect to receive a $10,000 gift card from our local upscale furniture store. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. The next day was car day. Jacob chose a Mustang, as I expected. Jordan surprised us all by picking lime green Kia. Allison chose a white Lexus. I explained to both kids the importance of establishing a credit line. They seemed to understand, which made it easier. It made it easier to put both cars in their names and fully finance them. What they didn't think about was that someone would have to pay for the cars. I did the same with Allison's new Lexus. I insured each of the new cars for 90 days. The total out-of-pocket expense for all 3 cars was just under $600, most of which went towards tags and titles. I decided to put both cars in my wife's and my names and finance them fully. I didn't think about who would pay for the cars. I did the same with Allison's new Lexus. I insured each of the new cars for 90 days. The total out-of-pocket expense for all 3 cars was just under $600. Most of that went towards tags and titles. It was a good investment on my part. A week later, we all moved into our new home. The more Nora and I worked together, the closer we became. We met every day. Sometimes I helped her with a project, and sometimes she helped me. We were getting very comfortable with each other. Terry was handling our welding business, and Nora had enough staff to run the real estate. A week later, I put my money where my mouth is and we all moved into our new place. The more Nora and I worked together, the closer we became. We met every day, sometimes I helped her with a project and sometimes she helped me. We were getting very comfortable with each other. Terry was handling our welding business, and Nora had enough staff to run the office. All our efforts were focused on ending our marriages. Nora planned to wait until Kyle was charged by one of the organizations investigating him. She didn't know who would get to him first. She seemed to think it didn't matter. My situation was a bit different. At some point, I decided that I didn't want a divorce. I had too much to lose, but I knew I had to. Office. We were both working hard to end our marriages. Nora planned to wait until Kyle was charged by one of the organizations investigating him. She didn't know who would get to him first. She seemed to think it didn't matter. My situation was a bit different. At some point, I decided that I didn't want a divorce. I had too much to lose, but I knew I had to do something. I just wanted it all to be over as quickly as possible. Nora came to the rescue again. John, have you ever been to Aruba, only as a port of call while on a cruise? But I've never stayed there. Did you like it? I wasn't there long enough to decide. Why do you ask? I have the opportunity to buy a condo in West Aruba for $1 million. Would you be interested? I just wanted it all to be over as quickly as possible. Nora saved the day again. John, have you ever been to Aruba, only as a port of call while on a cruise? But I've never stayed there. Did you like it? I wasn't there long enough to decide. Why do you ask? I have the opportunity to buy a condo in West Aruba for $1 million. Would you be interested in something like that? That might be a bit tricky for me. I probably don't need anything that complicated. I thought we could go halves. I'm sure you could manage it. I'm sure I could, but you have enough strength to handle it on your own. Why did you even think of including me in something like this? Consider it a partnership, an investment, so to speak. I fancy. I'm not saying I need anything too complicated, but I thought we could split it. I'm sure you could handle it on your own, but I'm in. Why did you think of including me? Just consider it a partnership, an investment, so to speak. I am a savvy businesswoman. I like using other people's money, and I like your company. This piqued my interest. $500,000 would give me a buy-in. I'll prepare the paperwork. You know there will be paperwork, right? I was surprised that I agreed to live with a woman I hadn't even had sex with. Now I was even more excited about the. As a savvy businesswoman, I'm used to dealing with other people's money, and I really like your company. I'm interested in the $500,000, and I'll take care of the paperwork. I was surprised that I agreed to live with a woman I hadn't even had sex with, but now I'm even more excited about the whole project. Terry and Man were fully aware of my issues with Allison and the kids, and they were ready to help in any way they could without being intrusive. Terry, I've decided I want to sell my half of the business to you and Man. That's really nice, John, but there's no way we could afford to buy out your share. I'd love to, but you know it's impossible. How does $1,000, Terry and Na were totally on board with my issues with Allison and the kids. They were ready to help in any way they could without being nosy. Terry, I've decided I want to sell my half of the business to you and Na. John, that's really nice, Terry, but there's no way we could afford to buy out your share. I'd love to, but you know it's impossible. How does $1,000 sound? Terry, I'm not looking for your help running the business. We both know it's almost running itself at this point. I'm leaving soon, and it will all fall on your shoulders. You'll be the sole owner and make all the decisions. All you need to do is call me occasionally for advice. Terry, I see, said the blind man. I suppose there will be a consultation fee attached to this phone call. Terry, smiling, think of it as a kind of lifetime annuity. Don't worry too much about it. Just make things easier for yourself. The company lawyer prepared. Terry and Man were a bit worried that I might be overreacting, but I told them I had everything under control. It's nice to have a friend you can trust. It seems funny, but I never bothered to verify Allison's affair with Kyle. I never felt the need. Terry and Man were a bit worried, but I told them I had everything under control. It's nice to have a friend you can trust. It seems funny, but I never felt the need to get compromising photos, emails, or phone messages. I wouldn't have needed them. I wasn't planning on getting a divorce. I was going to do what 21% of deadbeat dads do and just leave 2 weeks later. Franklin was arrested. I don't even know who got the award. He wasn't a big. I didn't need to get compromising photos, emails, or phone messages. I wasn't planning on getting a divorce. I was going to do what 21% of deadbeat dads do and just leave 2 weeks later. Franklin was arrested, but I don't even know who got the awards. He wasn't a big-time crook or embezzler. He was just a petty civil servant who dipped into others' pockets too often and messed around with my wife, Nora. We had long parted ways before all the dirt came out. She sold her company, along with 32 rental properties and 3 apartment buildings. She was set on a new life. I was her designated boy toy, as she referred to me, and I didn't find it offensive. We really managed to solidify our relationship after arriving in Aruba, but we never went through any courtship stage. It was as if everything had been prearranged. I made some arrangements, and I didn't miss my kids. Does that make me a bad father? Given the circumstances, I don't think so. I didn't miss my wife. Does that make me a bad husband? I don't think so. Nora became an avid golfer. She tried to get me interested, but there was no spark. She had a steady group of women she played with 3 days a week. We met with them, and about a dozen. I didn't miss my kids, which I guess makes me a bad father, right? I didn't miss my wife, which I guess makes me a bad husband, right? Nora became an avid golfer. She tried to get me interested, but there was just no spark there. She had a steady group of women she played with 3 days a week, and we met with them and about a dozen other former players a few times a week to socialize. I adapted to this very quickly. It was a new, carefree lifestyle, and it was truly enjoyable. I decided to take up painting to fill my time. I had always wanted to do it. Every morning, I would go down to the docks and set up my easel. I wasn't very good at it, though. I would come back to the apartment later and I'd go over to the docks every morning with my easel, set it up, and start painting. I wasn't very good at it, though, and would come back to the apartment later and start over. I'd scrape all the paint off the canvas and start fresh the next day. After 3 months, I still hadn't done anything with it, and I wasn't enjoying it. I'd avoided contact with anyone, but I felt I should call Terry. "John, it's about time I was starting to lose faith in you. Are you settled in?" "Settled in and feeling better than ever. First thing I'd do is scrape all the paint off the canvas to start fresh." The next day, 3 months had passed, and I still had nothing to show for it. I found it quite amusing. I avoided contact with anyone, but I felt I should call Terry. "John, it's about time I was starting to lose faith in you. Are you settled in, and feeling better than ever?" It was the best decision I ever made. For the next 10 minutes, Terry and I chatted about my new life in Aruba. I had no trouble convincing Terry to bring Man here for a week or 2. Things were going well. Terry apologized for not sending any consultation checks, but I had forgotten to give him an address or bank account number. I didn't need the money anyway. "Terry, I hate bringing this up, but could you tell me about my wife and family situation? I don't know everything, but I'll tell you what I can. It seems things aren't going well without you. First, Jacob was arrested. They caught him with 3 kilograms of fentanyl in his car's truck. The car, of course, was confiscated, and since he was over 18, he was locked up. Allison couldn't bail him out. He was arrested with 3 kilos of fentanyl in his car, and his car was confiscated. Since he was over 18, he was locked up. Allison couldn't bail him out. That's all I know about that. It's sad to hear. I know I'm his father, but honestly, I really don't care what happens to him. I tried, and I failed. Jordan's situation isn't much better. Shortly after moving into the new house, she doubled her activity on her website. From what I've heard, she gained a lot of followers, and then one day, she told her mother she was going to California to meet some producer guy. 2 weeks later, they found her Kia abandoned in Memphis. Allison hasn't heard anything from her or about her since. I take it you get most of this information from Allison. Yes, she regularly comes to the office, hoping to catch you. I can tell she doesn't believe me when I say you're gone. She was furious last. She was going to Cali to meet some producer guy. 2 weeks later, they found her Kia abandoned in Memphis. Allison hasn't heard anything from her or about her since. I take it you get most of this info from Allison. Yes, she regularly comes to the office, hoping to catch you. I can tell she doesn't believe me when I say you're gone. She was furious last week when she received the notice that she needed to finalize the option on the house or vacate by the end of the month. Very clever, John. She was completely bewildered. I don't know what her intentions are. I think some utilities have been cut off. She couldn't even afford to pay the electric bill. Did you help her? Don't be mad, John. I gave her $1,000. She got a notice saying she had to finalize the option on the house by the end of the month or vacate it. I don't know what her intentions are. I think some utilities have been cut off. She couldn't even afford to pay the electric bill. Did you help her? Don't be mad, John. I gave her $1,000 and told her to use it as a deposit for an apartment. I'm sure she'll spend it on something else. I felt sorry for her. I chuckled a bit. All right, Terry. I understand. Just deduct it from my next payment. By the way, can't her lover help her now, Terry? I laughed and said, he's in worse shape than she is. All I know is what we see on TV. There's nothing known about him right now, but there are some spicy details that pop up from time to time. I think he's going away for a while. Oh, and before I forget, Allison's car was repossessed since all her credit cards are invalid. She can't even use a taxi. I don't know how she's getting around. We chatted a bit more about business, preliminary. He's in worse shape than her, at least from what we see on There's not much info about him, except for a few spicy details that pop up every now and then. I think he's going away for a while. Oh, and Allison's car was repossessed because all her credit cards are invalid. She can't even use a taxi. I have no idea how she's getting around. We chatted a bit more about business, just the basics. We made plans for an upcoming vacation in Aruba. It was a good conversation. I enrolled in an online painting course with a guy in the UK 2 months later. One of the guys at the dock asked me to paint his sailboat. Nora worries that I might cut off my ear. Life goes on. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.